This weekend marks 3 weeks since 2 back-to-back snowstorms shut down much of the metro. At the time, many of us were focused on when the roads would be clear to get to work and when our kids were heading back to school. But there's another concern you might not have considered: the cost of fighting these storms. So how much did those storms cost your city? Well, first, to figure out the total, keep in mind this includes fuel for those trucks, it includes salt to put down on the roads, and of course manpower to pay for the employees who in this case put in a lot of overtime hours. Here at KSHP 41, we have an extensive beat system with our reporters specializing in both various topics and different parts of the metro. So we had them check in with their various cities to find out how much they spent and if those high costs could mean you, the taxpayer, might pay more. First up, let's grab a coat and head out to find out.
First, we start in Olathe, where coincidentally my husband is a snowplow driver. So he told me at the beginning of the season, this whole salt barn was full. You can see how much salt that they've already used so far, thanks to that 1 week of 2 winter storms. Here's a closer look at what those storms did to the city's budget.
There are things that you can pull from. There are a little bit of a bank for city emergencies such as this. So we're covered there, so there won't be like an additional tax increase, or that taxpayers won't see anything other than what has normally occurred on their tax bill.
For those 2 winter storms in 1 week in Olathe, the city spent around $850,000. The biggest chunk of that was for the people manning these snow plows. Employee costs were right around $378,000, and that accounted for about 51% of the city's budget. But again, as you heard, that's not going to cost taxpayers anything. But what about other cities? Are they going to be passing the buck on to you?
The city of Raymore reports spending more than $121,000 on overtime, vehicle usage, and salt. Speaking of salt, 618 tons of it, which is 61% of the fiscal year budget for salt. The total public works budget for the winter storm was 13%. And they say they have plenty in reserves for emergency funding, meaning the cost will not be passed on down to you.
I'm Todd Palmer in Independence, where city officials tell me they spent more than $322,000 on snow clearing operations related to the winter storm earlier this month. That includes 60 employees who worked 4,800 hours and drove more than 13,000 miles, putting down more than 1,847 tons of salt and 42,000 gallons of brine to get the roads clear again.
I'm Claire Bradshaw in the city of Grandview. City leaders tell me that they spent $39,000 dealing with that latest winter storm. To put that into perspective, that's 60% of their salt budget and 20% of their overtime budget in that $39,000. Now, city leaders say not to worry, their budget won't be greatly impacted because of that, and they've already restocked the salt dome.
And I'm Elise Shawnee reporting in Mission, where city officials told me they spent more than $18,000 in materials and more than $11,000 in overtime on that winter storm at the beginning of the month. So that's about 28% of their material budget and about 49% of their overtime budget. The good news is if the city exceeds its allocated budget for snow removal efforts, it would turn to the general fund to cover those expenses. I also checked in with Shawnee, where officials there say the city spent around $109,000 on ice control materials, which accounts for about 30% of the city's budget. Shawnee officials say those materials should cover the remainder of the winter storm season and that more money would be pulled from the general fund in case of an emergency.
I'm Rachel Henderson, Wyandotte County beat reporter. Here in Kansas City, Kansas, city officials say the winter storm cost about $237,000, which is about 23% of the overall $1,047,000 snow removal budget. They say this is a historic number because it makes up about a third of that overall budget. Public Works wants people to know that they've replenished salt reserves, have made the necessary repairs to equipment, and say they're ready for the next winter storm.
I'm KSHP 41's Douglas County beat reporter Lily O'Shea Becker, and here in Lawrence, the city spent $625,000 cleaning up the recent snowstorm. $60,000 of that was used to clean up the iconic Massachusetts Street so that residents and businesses could return to downtown Lawrence.
Before we go, we have one more to share with you, and in this case, it's the most for last. In Kansas City, Missouri, they spent $3.6 million on the winter storm, most of it towards labor costs. They say they budget $6.9 million a year for snow removal, and they say it will not be costing taxpayers more because they have emergency funds that they can pull from if needed. So in the end, they will not be passing the buck to you. Caitlin?
All right, thank you, Megan, and thanks to our reporters for checking in with those cities on their beats. Also, a special thanks to the snowplow drivers who work nonstop to clear our roads. As you just heard, the storms earlier this month were costly, but it sounds as though these are costs that won't be passed on to you.